Good morning, Communitas, and good morning, everyone who is joining our online service here on Facebook. I hope you guys are having a great Sunday morning already. Big thanks to Isaac for doing worship with his family. That was beautiful, so thank you for that. We continue our series through the book of Exodus, and just before I go to the text, I actually wanted to start with this story. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen this movie. If you haven't, I highly recommend it, but it takes place in 1960s when Ford tried to beat Ferrari at 24 hours of Le Mans, which is the hardest, most enduring race in the world. And so the story takes place between these two men, Ken Miles and Carroll Shelby. And the idea is basically that Henry Ford has asked them to build the greatest racing car in the world. We need something fast, we need something quick to beat Ferrari. And so Ken Miles is the greatest racing driver in America at that time. Carroll Shelby is one of the greatest car designers at that time in America. And so them together are trying to build this car. And somewhere in the middle of the movie, there is this scene where Carroll Shelby and Henry Ford are trying to make a decision on who should go to Le Mans for the first time. They have their cars, they have their engineers and teams, they're ready to go and race. But the question is about Ken Miles. Should Ken Miles go to the Le Mans? Because Ken Miles and Henry Ford had a little bit of issues in the past. And Henry Ford doesn't trust Ken Miles, and he says that actually, I don't trust this guy and I don't want him in our racing car. So Ken Miles doesn't go that year. They go to Le Mans, they try to beat Ferrari and they fail. Actually, none of their cars finished that year and Ferrari won. So they're going to try next year again. So they put the team together, cars are ready, they're ready to go to Le Mans. And again, Carroll Shelby goes to Henry Ford and says, listen, if we want to win this, we need Ken Miles to drive our car. He can win. We need this guy. He's the greatest racing driver. He knows the car the best. We need him. And so with some time, Henry Ford finally agrees. And he says, okay, Ken Miles can go that year to Le Mans. And so they actually go and they win. That year they won all three first positions of that race. So what happened was Henry Ford put his trust into Ken Miles that year. And the point I'm trying to make here is that not trusting people will sometimes lead to failure, but not trusting God will always lead to failure. And so as we continue our series through the book of Exodus, we're going to see now the prime example of Israel's failure to trust God. So I would encourage you to open your Bibles in Exodus chapter 32. Now I will go through the text a lot, so I recommend actually having the text in front of you. But if you maybe don't have a Bible, then I'm going to ask now Redona to actually read the whole chapter for us, just so you can get a good overview of what is about to happen.
Exodus 32. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us out from Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." Then Aaron saw this. He built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterwards they sat down to eat and drink, and they got up to indulge in revelry. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them, and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it, and have said, 'These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.' I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone, so that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. "Lord," he said, "why should your anger burn against your people whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, 'It was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth'? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever." Then the Lord relented, and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. Moses turned and went down to the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. The tables were the work of God. The writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. Then Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting. He said to Moses, "There is a sound of war in the camp." Moses replied, "It is not the sound of victory. It is not the sound of defeat. It is the sound of singing that I hear." When Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf the people had made, burned it into the fire, then he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. He said to Aaron, "What did these people do to you, that you led them into such great sin?" "Do not be angry, my lord," Aaron answered. "You know how prone these people are to evil. They said to me, 'Make us gods who will go before us.' As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." So I told them, "Whoever has any gold jewelry, make it off." Then they gave me the gold, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. Moses saw that the people were running wild and that Aaron had let them get out of control, and so became a laughing stock to their enemies. So he stood at the entrance of the camp and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the Levites rallied to him. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap a sword to his side. Go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor." The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 of the people died. Then Moses said, "You have been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day." The next day Moses said to the people, "You have committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." So Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now, please forgive their sin, but if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." The Lord replied to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. Now go, lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin." And the Lord struck the people with a plague because of what they did with the calf Aaron had made.
All right, thank you, Redona, for that. And so, by reading this chapter, I think we all probably, raise a question like, why did this happen? Why would this nation, who have seen the wonders of God, they have been brought out of Egypt, they have crossed the Red Sea, they have seen the presence of God, God has made covenant with them. Why would, after all these amazing, beautiful things, this nation would rebel? And I think the main reason why they choose to rebel is because they fail to trust God. What is happening here is that at the end of chapter 31, we read that Moses is ready to come down from the mountain. He has all the instructions necessary to build a tabernacle now. He has the 2 plates, the 2 stone plates with the 10 commandments. And so he's ready to go down to the nation and instruct them of all the things necessary for them to do. But there's a little bit of delay, and the nation grows impatient. And they start questioning, where is Moses? Is he coming back? We're kind of stuck here in the middle of this desert, and what is happening? Is God will deliver us? Will God help us now? And so they go to Aaron and they tell him to build this idol. And what is happening here is that Israel is taking matters into their own hands. Instead of waiting for Moses, who will bring the instructions of tabernacle, they will build their own tabernacle. Of course, it's not going to be a tent. It's going to be a golden calf, But the same principle applies here, that they are going to do something that is not coming from God, and they will take matters into their own hands and basically say, we don't trust God on this one. We're going to try something here, we think is better, basically. And so, basically, this kind of failure in trust will continue in the cycles throughout the story of Israel, pretty much throughout the Old Testament. They have the law, they have the rules, and, they fail to follow them. Something happens, they fail to trust God, and, they fall into sin. And because of that, God needs to bring judgment on them. But because God is loving God, He also shows a lot of grace. And there's a lot more grace than judgment into this story. And after that, they promise God again, we'll follow the law. They serve God. They fail again. Again, there's sin. God has to judge them, but God shows grace. And so this cycle continues and continues throughout their story. But at the core, it is this failure to trust God at these moments. And so the second part why this happens is because Aaron really doesn't object to them at all. It really shows Aaron's incompetence as a leader. Moses is up on a hill, and he is left as authority of the crowd there. And when the crowd goes to him and tells him that we want you to do this, he doesn't stand on his beliefs and values. He caves in, and he says, okay, I will do this. I will do this. And you can still think, there's a big crowd, probably scary for him, but at the same time, there is a reason why God picked Moses to lead Israel out of Egypt. It wasn't Aaron, it was Moses. And I think there are some serious faults into Aaron's leadership that we can see into this text. So what happens is he decides to actually build them an idol. And so what he says to the people is, okay, go to the nation and bring all the gold you can gather. And with this gold, I will build this idol for you. And what interesting is that if they would have waited a couple of, just moments away from Moses coming down from the hill and giving them instructions of the tabernacle, they would actually gather the gold to build the tabernacle. But instead, they are gathering gold to build this idol. And so what they're doing is they're really building their own tabernacle here with the gold that they're getting from all the people. And again, the interesting thing about is why use the calf? And so there are two reasons for that. One is that Israel have just left Egypt. And Egypt being a pagan society, they had a god that was of an image of a bull, a full-grown bull. So they have that image in mind already. Now they're going from Egypt to the Promised Land. And nations in the Promised Land also have gods in the image of full-grown bull. Now, why doesn't Aaron use full-grown bull? Why does he go with the calf? It's because for him, calf is something more innocent in this matter. So what he does is he takes something from these pagan societies, brings it down to his values, his level, and then we can read that in verses 5 and 6 that he actually applies God to it. So he takes something out of these pagan cultures, adds God to it, and tries to make it okay. But really it doesn't work, because at the core it's still idolatry. And that's why it's the biggest issue here, that they actually have broken the commandment. And of course there is response after this, and response is quite serious. And first things first is that God is angry. He's very angry with them. And in the verse 8 we can read, this is what God says to Moses. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them, and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. Now God says to Moses, they have been so quick to turn on me. It's unbelievable, you know. And really it is a good observation, because you have to remember that, you know, moments ago they just made covenant, you know, between God and themselves. And now, because of Moses not showing up at the right time, they immediately turn away from God. And so God decides that, you know, I'm gonna punish this nation. I will destroy this nation, because they have broken the law. They have broken the covenant. You know, they have fallen into sin. And God is upset, and he says, you know, I will destroy this nation. He actually tells that in the verse 10. Now leave me alone, so that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation. So he will destroy the Israel, but Moses will kind of start the new nation. So something similar with the flood and Noah. Now, interesting phrase God uses to describe Israel here is stiff-necked people. And that actually is a common phrase used by farmers at that time. You know, they would use this metaphor of an ox or a horse that will not respond to a rope when tugged. So, you know, a farmer has a horse in the field, and he puts a rope around his neck and tries to pull the horse in his direction. You know, horse should follow me, you know, take my lead, you know, follow me. But, you know, horse, stiff-necked, doesn't want to follow the farmer. And in the same way, God is trying to pull Israel into his direction, you know, follow me, okay, trust me, I will lead you, I will deliver you. And Israel ignores that, you know, they have a stiff neck, and they want to go their own way. And that's what they're actually doing right now. So they broke the covenant is broken, and God is about to destroy them. And what happens next is Moses tries to kind of argue with God about this. He actually goes back to the promise God made to Abraham. And, you know, passages like this where Moses and God is having kind of like even a debate, and even seems like Moses is changing God's mind here, really does, you know, give us a little bit of an issue. Like, how can you even think about changing God's mind? And then that whole thing raises tons of other questions. I won't go into detail into this text now. John will actually cover this in a couple of weeks, and he's going to go into detail what do we need to think about these conversations Moses had with God. So through that conversation, God makes a decision not to destroy Israel, but there will be punishment. And so the next thing that happens is that the law is broken. You know, that's another response, that the law is broken. And we can read in verse 19, when Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. So it's kind of powerful image there that the law is literally broken. You know, those plates dropping on the floor and splitting into pieces. You know, that's the law broken. The commandments are broken. And that's what actually Israel did, you know. They broke the first two commandments. No other gods before me, and no idolatry. And those are the ones that Israel broke at that time. So they have broken the law, and, you know, Moses is so angry with them. You know, he just can't believe that they actually would do this. So he makes the decision to really punish them. And the way he does that is he's going to make them to drink their own idol. We can read in verse 20, and he took the calf the people made and burned it into the fire, and then he ground it to the powder, scattered it to the water, and made the Israelites drink it. Okay, now, why would he do something like this? And there's actually quite a good reason for this. Basically that process he's doing there, like burning the gold, grinding it down to a powder, and then put it into water. In that way, if you grind down the gold into small enough powder, when you put it into water, it can turn the water blood red. This is actually something called colloidal gold. If you can really make those gold particles small enough, then adding them to the water, it will turn the water blood red. And actually, that's what he does, because he puts that powder into the stream that flows from the mountain, and Israelites drink it. And this just kind of foreshadows, the plagues of Egypt. If you remember, God was judging Egypt, through the plagues, and he was judging their gods. And one of the plagues was that the river turned blood red. And so in kind of the same way, Moses doing here is, judging Israel with kind of this kind of plague reference by making them drink this blood red water. And so the last response to this event is judgment. And so this is something God will bring upon Israel right now. And what happens is he instructs Moses, and Moses then instructs Levites. In verses 28 and 29 we read, "The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 of the people died. Then Moses said, 'You have been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your own sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day.'" Okay, so why kill the 3,000 there? There's a good reason to believe that these 3,000 people were the group of people who went to Aaron. And they are the ones who initiated the whole process of golden calf. And so that's why the punishment for them is so extreme, the death. But for the whole nation, there's going to be another punishment. And we can read that in the verses 34 and 35. "Now go, lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin." And the Lord struck the people with a plague because of what they did with the calf Aaron had made. So this is the punishment for the whole nation here. It's a plague. And you have to understand that God can't just turn a blind eye to our sin. He can't turn a blind eye to Israel's sin at this moment. There needs to be some punishment. They need to learn, basically. They need to learn that this is not okay. And when we talk, about passages like this, we try to emphasize how cruel God is. He kills people, he punishes people, but that is not the character of God. And actually, we can read about God's character just a few chapters forward. Here in chapter 34, verses 6 to 7, we can read what God's character is. The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. Now see how much focus there is on God's love, forgiveness, compassion. Those are characteristics of God. And yet, at the same time, God can't turn a blind eye on our sin. And actually, these chapters from 32 to 34 will really emphasize God's grace. God had every right to destroy Israel at that moment, yet he didn't. And that's where God's grace is. He decided to go with them. Even though they will continue to sin and turn against God, God will still show them his love. And so really this whole event will repeat again and again and again into the story of Israel. This failure to trust God over and over again, that will always lead to sin in Israel, always will lead to sin in their lives. And if you remember that our kind of whole series focuses on these four words, rescue, rules, relationship, and represent. And in some way, it is almost like this cycle that Israel keeps going through. God rescues them from their own sin, and then gives them rules. They go to the rules. They follow them, and then they go into this relationship with God again, and everything's good. And then they can represent God to other nations, because they themselves are righteous finally. But again, they fail, they fall into sin. Again, God has to come in, rescue them. There's judgment, but there's also a lot of grace there. Again, they go back to the law, they follow the law, relationship is restored, they can again represent God, and again they fail. So it's kind of like this cycle that they will continue to go through over and over again. But I want you to remember that the story of Israel is the story of the church. It is our story. And we do the same thing today. We fail to trust God. And again, God shows us His grace. He rescues us. But He wants us to follow some guidelines He has given us. He wants us to live a holy life, because through that we can represent Him. We can be in this relationship with God, and that's what He wants. He wants us to be in this covenant with Him. And so, I think a good way how to kind of bring this whole story together, also with a little bit of New Testament. This is something that John Woods actually sent me and wrote me, and I actually wanted to quote him on this. This is what he says. Jesus drinks the lethal blood, red cup, on the cross so that our curse becomes a blessing. The golden calf is a God in whom we see life, but it gets us killed. Jesus is the God in whom we see death, but who offers us life. The calf gets us killed, the lamb gives us a life. We don't need a new image of God. We don't need to build a golden calf in our lives. We already have the greatest image of God given to us, and that is Jesus Christ. And so, for us to trust God is to worship Jesus every day. Amen.